Hello everyone, Penguin Pilot here, and welcome to another video. Today, we'll be covering Enroute Low Altitude Charts. We'll discuss basic chart symbols and waypoints, Victor Airway distance markers, and minimum IFR altitudes. As always, if these videos help you out, let me know by hitting that like button. Now, let's get started. The first thing you'll notice about the chart is a lack of landmarks. On the VFR chart, you'd see cities, roads, etc. to help you navigate. But on the IFR chart, it assumes you can't see any of those items. You're in the clouds, and you'd have to navigate solely by your instruments. However, they do still display the shorelines of large bodies of water. This is depicted by the green shaded bars. As you can see, if we compare to the VFR chart, they line up with Lake Erie. Because, in the case of an emergency, you'd still want to know if you're over land or a body of water. Another thing you'll notice different is the airspace. We no longer have multiple colors, but there are still a few ways to identify airspace. First off would be the shape. Just like in VFR, Bravo airspace is large and each airport is unique. It is depicted by blue shading with a solid blue line surrounding it. Charlie airspace is also depicted by blue shading, however, they follow their normal uniform size and have a dashed blue line surrounding it. They also have a box C, or Charlie, in their airport information. Delta airspace is only depicted by the D, or Delta, in their airport information. So let's look at the rest of the airport information. We'll use two airports we're familiar with. At the top, you'll have the airport name, followed by its identifier. Next, we have its airspace, like we talked about. However, the little star next to it indicates that the tower has part-time operating hours. We then have airport elevation, lighting available, and the longest runway. The circle around the L indicates pilot-controlled lighting. And finally, we have the available weather frequencies. Airports also have three different colors: blue, green, and brown. Brown airports do not have a published instrument approach available. Green airports do have an approach available, and blue airports not only have regular approaches, but also have approaches in the DoD flips, or military approaches. Now let's look at some waypoints. There are two types of waypoints. RNAV waypoints, usually GPS, are displayed by a blue diamond, such as Polar, ARDI, and URSA. Traditional waypoints, usually based off VORs, are shown with black triangles, such as QB, LUGS, and OASO. Similarly, the black lines depict Victor Airways, based off VORs, and the blue lines are RNAV-T routes, which can be, but don't have to be based off a VOR. Think of these as your official highways, and the waypoints are your exits. So if these are the highways, what do all the different numbers mean? We'll use this one here as an example. The Victor 450 refers to its name, similar to saying US 23 or I-94. The number at the beginning and end of the airway depicts what radios it's based on. So, Victor 450 is based on the 286 radio off of Flint and the 095 radio off of Muskegon. This will be very useful when we talk about cross-country planning in a later video. The free-floating numbers depict the distance between two waypoints. So, 16 miles here, 15 miles here, and 12 miles there. And no, they're not necessarily to scale. The little bubbles, or bullet bills, depict the distance between waypoints and the VOR. LUGS is 31 miles from the Flint VOR. 16 miles plus 15 miles gives you 31. Cuddy is 43 miles. But if you notice, the arrow on Paolo is facing the other way. That one's assuming we're coming from the left, traveling east, so the distance is based off the Muskegon VOR. Now let's say we wanted to know the total distance of the airway. That would be these squares here. It's depicted twice on this airway, 102, 102. To the north, Victor 274 is 77 miles, and Victor 193, 285 to the west is 48 miles. So that's a lot more convenient than having to add each leg together. So that's our distance markers. Now let's talk about altitudes. Boldmethod has an article explaining these altitudes, which I'll link down in the description, and I'd encourage you to go read that as well. but let's review 6 of my primary ones now. First off, we have minimum en route altitude, or MEA. MEAs are depicted via this number above the airway, and they indicate the altitude which provides adequate obstruction clearance and navigational signal. You'll see MEAs a lot throughout your training. Next, we have minimum obstruction clearance altitude, or MOCA. MOCAs are depicted via the number with the asterisk next to it, below the MEA. They still provide adequate obstruction clearance, but only provide navigational signal within 22 nautical miles. So they allow you to get to a lower altitude, but you have to be closer to get a navigational signal. We'll talk more about VOR range in the next video. The third one is off-route obstruction clearance altitude, or ROCA. They're depicted by the brown free-floating numbers and display the lowest off-route altitude within each quadrant. They provide 1,000 feet obstruction clearance in non-mountainous areas and 2,000 feet in mountainous areas. Basically, it's the lowest altitude you can fly in a quadrant and not hit anything. After that, we have minimum reception altitude, or MRA. MRAs are depicted by a little flag with an R attached to the waypoint. They also say MRA next to it with the required altitude. MRAs are the lowest altitude at which a fix can be identified. In order to identify this waypoint, NEPS, we need the 335 radio off the OXI VOR. So in order to receive a signal to that OXI VOR, we need to be at 3,000 feet. Let's look at another one. Up top, we have the waypoint MINTS. In order to identify MINTS, we need to be at 3,500 feet so that we can receive the 028 radio off of the CGT VOR. Basically, the MRAs ensure you have a clear signal to whatever it is you need to identify a waypoint. So that's MRAs. Now let's look at MCAs, or minimum crossing altitude. MCAs are also depicted with a flag, but this one has an X on it. MCAs are the lowest altitude at which a fix can be crossed, and the required altitudes will be listed next to the waypoint. This one says that when traveling on Victor 78, you must cross the fix at 5,000 feet if traveling southbound. The next line says that if traveling on Victor 609, you also must cross at 5,000 feet if southbound. Our last altitude is maximum authorized altitude, or MAA. MAAs are easy to spot because they say MAA followed by the required altitude. As the name implies, they are the maximum authorized altitude for that route segment. So that's all the altitudes we'll talk about today. There are others, but these are the main 6 that I like to focus on and want all my students to memorize, because some, if not all, will show up on your check ride.